Gareth Southgate proving at the Euros that he is indeed the right man for the United job. This is the ArsenalVision post-match podcast. My name's Elliot Smith, Blackman, Twitter, Yankee Gunner. Hello, everybody. Remember Arsenal? It still exists. It's still a thing. Come on now. Come on, people now. Smile on your brother. Everybody get together. Talk about being a Gunner right now. Come on. I mean, it is time to get back into the swing of Arsenal. So we are here to talk about the Euros. Look, a couple of things. Clive, let's face it, Clive is the man. Clive is the man you want to hear. And Clive and I did the banger of a podcast over on Patreon about the fixtures. We went through our fixtures, City's fixtures, Champions League fixtures, all the fixtures. Here's how in-depth we got. We noticed that Arsenal have to play every team home and away. That's how in-depth we got. But we talked about rotation and what it's going to mean for the squad and who we should go in the market, having considered the expansive new Champions League format. We did it all. And if you're not there listening to it, the only way you're going to find out what happens next season is watching next season. Who wants to do that? Sounds like a hell of a lot of work. So I'd just go for the pod. But, to each their own. By the way, Euro Daily is going on in the Football Vision feed. So that's cool. Copa America preview show is out. Later in this pod, Mike from the Gooners Pod is going to come on and celebrate the life of Kevin Campbell. And it is sad that we have lost him. It is important that we celebrate him. And so I'm glad that Mike came on to do it. And I want to say this. I'm not going to sit here and pretend Mike was like Kevin's best friend and family. That's not the case. The fact of the matter is Mike knew the man. He was more connected to Super Kev than I was. And I wanted someone on who had a bit more depth of understanding, who had seen him play, who had gotten to know him a little bit post-playing, and I think we had a nice chat about that. So we'll put that out there, and I thank Mike for coming on, and that's at the back half of the show. But today of all days, we also put out on Patreon a history pod of the marble halls, the clock end, the East Stand, the clock for the clock end. The history of the club is being chronicled by Tim over on Patreon in a collection we call, get this, History. And it is good stuff. It's good. Go for a walk, listen to Tim for 35, 40 minutes and really know your club. We all know our club, but do we know our club? It's like our spouse. We think we know them, but do we know what they did on that trip to Argentina in the 90s? Do we really know them? This is a way to really know them. Here with you now is Paul. You can find him on Twitter, Pause My Pants. Hello, Pause. Woohoo, indeed. How you doing?
Good. I had a fallout with my Uber driver.
You mentioned this to me before, but like not a falling out where it's like, oh, maybe I'll get a poor Uber rating. Like a fallout where you were like, I'm getting out of the Uber. I'm not even going to sit in this car with you. I'm going to obtain another method of arriving at my location.
I'm seeing other Uber drivers now. So first time it's ever happened to me. He got on my tits, Elliot.
I'm gonna tell you something. The only thing surprising to me about this story is that it's the first time it's ever happened to you. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to talk about Southgate in England because it is just topical. And I think that there's actually some relevant things we can talk about vis-a-vis like Rice and how he looked and Saka and the importance of coaching and the importance of midfields and how that relates to Arsenal. We'll make it Arsenal-y. Then we'll talk fixtures a little bit. Now, I don't want to overdo it because I just think I went through it with Clive so much that it's covered. If you want to go to that pod, you can listen to it. But I want to talk about it in context of, are the domestic cups dying and are they in jeopardy? Is there a future for the domestic cups and what does that future look like? So we'll talk about all of that. Let's start with England. And I just think it's this simple, Paul. Like I have always struggled to really arrive at a conclusion for what I think the impact of coaching really is. Because I think at some point, a team fluctuates within a range of performances that roughly approximates their talent. Now, first of all, you have to pick the right talent to get out there. And that seems like a fundamental component of management, which is just what's my system and what's my team. And if you don't put the right team on the pitch, that can be a problem. And I think the best managers, let's take out the best and the worst managers. I think good managers get you to the sort of upper bounds of your talent. Bad managers get you to the sort of lower bounds of your talent. And then the really extraordinary ones, the ones that are really out there as outliers, can elevate your talent or literally drag you beneath what the floor of your talent should be. I don't think Southgate is dragging England beneath its floor, so to speak, but I definitely think he's trundling along it. And the talent is so good that they're going to get out of this group anyway, right? Like it's so talented, you can't help but get out of the group. But I think the thing that really interests me, Paul, is he seems to pick names without considering what the capabilities of the players are other than just this is a talented guy with a name on the back of a shirt? How do you diagnose what's wrong with England and why, for example, someone as talented as Declan Rice can go out there, play against Denmark, and look like a shell of the player he is for Arsenal?
Yeah. So, like, I do think I'm the other end of the spectrum in the how important managing and coaching is. I think back in the day when football was basically 4-4-2 or 4-2-3-1, and it was a little bit vibish, a little bit feelish, and everybody knew where to play and how to play, and the kind of two systems. I think it was true that the 80% in the middle, the manager didn't move the needle much. There's such a leaning into the over optimization of football. You could say optimization, but it's almost an over optimization of football with the positional play that if your guys aren't on it, I mean, it's all triggers and signals and this guy does this and that guy. Like, I think the days in which you built in a 4-4-2 and you had wingers, everybody knew the choreograph and it wasn't super keyed into the movements of the other player. You get it up the wing, you bang in across, you get the big lags in, you bring the guys charge in to pick down the knockdowns. Like, that's just not what's going on in a football game. You hear it every time somebody joins Arsenal from West Ham, how they suddenly learn so much about football. Now, they didn't learn anything about so much about football. They learned so much about a particular system. The good thing for Gareth Southgate is he doesn't really play that much of a system.
Yeah.
It's a lot closer. I think it's quite basic. I think it's a lot closer to it's not a 4-4-2 at all, but the simplicity of the system is it's just simpler, which it kind of has to be at international level. So I think there's some mileage there that it's not all about Southgate. And I think it wasn't the case that he was holding England back before, but he was kind of running on vibes a little bit. There was an energy and a freedom, and like he just kind of unleashed this, got the clouds away from this that were hanging over the England team. But now, after a few tournaments, there's kind of a cloud gathering because of him, not despite him, and he's just not a very good manager. And my big concern in all of this is the chances of him taking over after Eric Ten Hag look slimmer and slimmer. But I'm more and more convinced it's something I want to see. Gareth Southgate managing United. I think Gareth Southgate is just not a very good manager. I don't think he has any great picture, any great idea, any great feel for the game. And kind of, why would he?
Sometimes you give the game away with a comment. And Gareth Southgate, I don't know if you saw this, after this game said, this is a real quote, "We have no natural replacement for Calvin Phillips." Now, if Calvin Phillips, not lacking a Calvin Phillips replacement is what's holding you back, you were never very good to begin with. But also, like, you know the meme, why he's saying fuck me for? You know that meme? Like, what did he say fuck me for? What did Kobe Mainu and Adam Wharton sitting on the bench being like, what's he saying fuck me for? Like, those guys aren't able to replace Calvin Phillips. I think the real issue is that Gareth Southgate has picked some names on the back of a shirt and tried to get them all onto the pitch. If you want Harry Kane to thrive, he needs a run in behind winger that he can be a backstop, get the ball, play in the running behind winger, arrive in the box, second man run, right? If you want Trent Alexander-Arnold to thrive, you need to sit him on the right side of the pitch where he can play that early in-swinger, that early out-swinger, that long raking pass that pulls defenses apart from the angles he's used to, but isn't expected to complete 95% of his passes at 100 passes a game, right? If you want Phil Foden to thrive, right? Phil Foden needs a collapse the box striker who pulls defenses away and lets him pick up those pockets of space at the top of the box where he can be so lethal. All these players have certain things that help them thrive. Bukayo Saka doesn't need anything to thrive because he'll thrive in any environment. He's just a great all-around talent. But Declan Rice needs someone who can be more of the ball recycling, possession maintaining, metronomic player. And Rice has to have that freedom to say, I'm going to buccaneer through the midfield. I'm going to carry it through the midfield. I'm going to punch passes up the line. You can see the gears turning in the heads of these players, Paul. I watch Spain, and you watch Spain's build-up. It's one touch, one touch, one touch, one touch. You can't tell me that Jude Bellingham and Declan Rice and Bukayo Saka and Phil Foden and Harry Kane can't play one touch. But just the ponderousness of the way they play. Declan Rice in this game, I don't think I've seen him do it at any point at Arsenal. 1 touch, 2 touch, 3 touch. Are you going to carry it forward? Thinking about it? Maybe not. Am I going to pass it forward? No. Should I go back to the defender? Oh, I've lost the ball or I've given it away. That's not Declan Rice. And so I wonder if you think like that profiles make systems and profiles make teams even more than particular players. And that this is what makes Mikel a little bit interesting, right? When we were saying, well, why is he going for Kai Havertz? Because Kai Havertz had a profile. Mikel had a view for what that profile was going to do. And in every instance on the pitch, right, whether it was Zinchenko at first and now it's Timber, I think we understand what the profile is supposed to do. And I think Southgate just totally missed the boat on that. I mean, John Stones plays midfield a lot for City, or at least strides out in the midfield. In this game, he didn't look confident passing the ball at all. Players don't know where they're going to be. Trent doesn't know where to stand in midfield. So are we learning a little something here about players being more about their profile and their profile for a fit in the system than just about are they the good player or not the good player, you know?
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, these are all really good players, and they sucked today.
Yeah,
they
people are talking about Kane being washed. I mean, Kane just had one of his best statistical seasons ever in the Bundesliga. Now, whether I like Kane or not is beside the point. There's clearly a way to get something out of him, you know?
Yeah, and it seemed to involve having wingers with lightning speed getting in behind. If he wants to, like look, it's a terrible thing to say for us to have to say about Harry Kane, but he is a bit of a worldie. Super intelligent, doesn't look it, doesn't sound it.
Look,
but
just because he doesn't know how to close his mouth doesn't mean he's not intelligent.
Yeah. Can't close his mouth, but he can close a pass. And like he made Heung-min Son look like a worldie. I mean, he's a top class player, but he made him look an absolute worldie when they were finding each other. He does it at Bayern with run in behind lightning fast wingers. We have this England team. Jesus, what did I might have to hand in my passport somewhere.
What the hell is it? Neither of your countries, dude.
Yeah. Well, I did live there for 5 years, but definitely some kind of a slip there. Like he takes off the players who could have found the players after the players he could have found were taken off or something like that.
Yeah,
it's right.
I mean, so you bring in Watkins, who can run in behind, and you take off the guy who's good at playing the passes to the guy who's Trent behind.
And it's like, that tells me, because in a way I think he's got a lot in common with Carlo Ancelotti in that he's got bear with me here. He's got some really good players. He just needs to slightly get out of their way, get them playing with each other in the same parts of the pitch and kind of let them vibe a little. That's his problem, but it's also his problem. He doesn't have the feel to do that and the combination. Ancelotti would never take off the wrong players who needed to play with the other players. And I'm sure Gareth Southgate gets it abstractly, but you've got to run through the filter. Look at the mistakes Arteta made early on that he learned his way through. He knew abstractly what he was trying to do, but you got to feel it out in these games, and he doesn't have Arteta's intelligence, but that feeling what the game needs and who needs to be on and who needs to play with whom, he just doesn't have it. That to me was the most telling thing I've ever seen with Southgate, that he took off the guys who could find the guys who run in behind just before he brings on the guys who could run in behind.
It's really, really strange to me. And I think you see two Englands. I think I see the England that the first 15 minutes against Serbia looked like what we thought they could be, and they scored and they took the lead. And what happened? They fell out of the game completely. And the same thing happened in the Denmark game, I think. For a little while, there was a bright and vibrant England, and it fell away. And the teams sort of reflect the ethos of their manager. And I just think Southgate is so much more comfortable killing a game than bringing it to life. He is so much more comfortable trying to control the variables and kill the game by getting everybody behind the ball than he is saying, I think my talent is better than your talent, so I'm going to go out there and try to win it that way. In a way, this is the perfect team for a Jurgen Klopp, right? Who says, we're going to play basketball with you, and our basketball players are better, and they're going to beat you, right? Or Mikel, who says, we're going to kill the game, but we're going to kill the game by having all the ball and all the territory, and it's going to be our ball, and we'll keep it. Now, to be fair, I don't know that England can play Mikel ball because I don't know that they have a Jorginho, a Xhaka, right? 100 pass, 95% pass completion midfielder. I know that's not Trent. The other thing is it so reflects what's wrong with Southgate in a way because like Trent's a right back. He's a really unique and special right back. And if you play him, you'll probably be a little more exposed than if you play Walker. But that's a trade-off you should make because Trent will find Foden and Saka and Kane and Bellingham in such interesting places. And those players are killers. And Cole Palmer can come on and be a killer. And Ollie Watkins can come on and be a killer. And Anthony Gordon come and be a killer. And so lean into that. You know, they need that Klopp mentality.
The other thing is, like, I think it's a great point. The other thing about Trent is that his superpower is when he drifts in from the wing as a full back, kind of unmarked. It's the whole free roll. It's what, like, Stones isn't the greatest midfielder in the world, but he wreaks devastation because they thought he was about to be a centre back in that moment, and he steps into midfield. Alexander-Arnold is not a very physical midfield, and so it's not so hard to match him. If you give it intensity and hustle and pressing, you'll take him out of the game. You'll block what he wants to do. And like just saying, you know what, we'll take out all the risk with him. We won't ask him to be a fullback. We'll put him in midfield where he's surrounded by actual, real physical midfielders. Oh gosh, he didn't produce anything. Well, he only ever produces anything, a slight exaggeration. When you thought he was a fullback, he drifts into midfield. He's an extra guy. He's in space. He's moved into the spot that he wants to pick up the ball, as opposed to having already been in midfield and already marked. It's Southgate's need for safety is killing actually the ability to kind of surprise and like. Yeah, it's just classic Southgate. He's going for the 80% safe solution, and it's too easy for other teams to neutralize and, in fact, outplay in this case.
Yeah, you have to have an identity, and then the players you pick have to support that identity. And frankly, if Southgate wants to be 10 men behind the ball, I mean, you can be that, but you can't play Foden, Kane, and Saka up front. You can't put Trent in midfield. And it tells you a lot that to your point, he takes off the guys that can hit the men who run in when he brings the men that run in. And that his midfield solution is, let me bring in Gallagher. I want a guy who runs around and protects people, not a guy who gets his foot on the ball and gives us control. We've lost control of the game. What's Southgate's answer to that? Let's lean into counterattacking and defending. Instead of let's bring on guys who are comfortable getting their foot on the ball and can get us back into this game in a controlling way. And I just think it's a shame. I mean, it's the second game in a row where in early stages of the second half of the game, I'm watching Harry Kane get the ball with his back to goal in his own half, turning and trying to dribble three men to create a counter with nobody there for him to play in and release. And it is pretty remarkable to me that managing England this long, England feel like they still don't have an identity. I could understand if he took over the England team in March and he's like, I've got a lot of good pieces, but I'm not sure how they fit together. He's been in this job since 2016, right?
Yeah.
I mean, that's a long time. And to not understand the dynamics of the players that he has, I think is difficult. And he's always been a little bit imprisoned by the feeling that he needs to pick certain players. I know the English press are unique and you want to keep them off your back, and there are things you do to make that happen. But, you know, whatever you want to say about Deschamps, for example, who I can't stand and don't think he's good. He makes big calls. What was that, sir?
Yeah, it's not that unique, though. I mean, the French have the same problem. I mean, that's why Deschamps is always putting his foot on somebody's neck. And the Germans have the same. You got to play this guy. Spain have had that. True. Italy have had that. Brazil massively.
But the manager has to have the identity and decide what he wants to do. I mean, Deschamps is an example. Someone I think does it wrong, but he
does it.
He does it exactly. Well, okay. I think one of the things that I wanted to do in exploring this Southgate thing is just say, like, how do you feel then about sort of management and the way this all fits together and sort of appreciating maybe Mikel and the way we think about Erik ten Hag and the way these things all fit together? Because I look at England and I see a cluster of players that if you said that cluster of players is going to be the Arsenal squad next season, I think it would have a chance to win the league under Mikel Arteta, And I see a team that has no identity under Ten Hag.
Yeah, there might be a player or two you recruit to be slightly better fit, but if you had that level of player all over the pitch, yeah, you could go for the title with that team.
Yeah. So I don't know. I mean, like it's funny. I don't even particularly care if England win or not. I do want Rice to look good. I do want Saka to look good. I do want them to win things. I do want them to go on and be successful, but I want that for Kai at Germany, and I want that for Saliba with France. Does it frustrate you? I find myself frustrated by England. I'm like, it reminds me, there's a movie called Swingers, and they're trying to doesn't really, it's a bit of an outdated movie, but basically he's trying to tell his, handsome, successful friend that he should be able to go and speak to, single people, the opposite sex, and be effective with them. And he's like, you got these claws and you got these teeth, and you're looking at the bunny and you're like, with these claws and these teeth, how do I kill the bunny? I don't know how to kill the bunny. He's like, why don't you just kill the bunny? And like I said, it doesn't translate great to today now that I think about it. Not a movie you'd maybe make today, but I feel like that with England. I'm like, you got the Jude Bellingham and with the Kane and the Foden and with the Saka and with the Trent and and you can't kill the bunny. And like, it frustrates me.
Yeah, no, look, you're seeing a very average manager and not a very average Premier League manager who doesn't actually get to manage very often, right? He's not prepared for this even by being in the job for so long, because there's only a few real games he gets to play every 2 years. Everything else is kind of, okay, they got beat by Iceland, but you don't learn much get either beating Iceland or being beat by Iceland. So that's the bit he's good at, getting them into a tournament, probably getting them through the group level. Like we saw a very similar thing in the final against Italy, 4 years ago, that he can't coach live in a game. He just doesn't have that feel for it. And you just see it with this guy. He doesn't have that ability to coach. You see it more and more with Mikel. That's where he's getting stronger and stronger. His in-game adjustments, which isn't just tactical, it isn't just the brain, it's feeling what's needed on the pitch with those players, what the opposition is doing, what's going to happen next. Because if you just manage to this moment, say it's 70 minutes and you manage to that moment, no, you got to manage the next 20, 25 minutes and how you feel, your picture of how that game's going to evolve, and make your changes then. And like, you start to appreciate the job that somebody like Thomas Frank does. Like, there were a couple of suggestions about get him for the England job. I totally see that, because he's a guy who knows how to play probably a better manager for the England team than, say, Mikel Arteta, who's Arteta's geared in a particular approach to football. And I think there's a lot of variety in it. But Thomas Frank is going to be a much more flexible, who are my players? How do I get a tune out of these guys? Gareth Southgate has neither of those for me.
Yeah, I mean, it's really weird if you think about it. This is a guy whose managerial record is he managed Middlesbrough for 3 seasons. Played 151, won 45, drew 43, lost 63, got relegated out of the championship, I think. Then was a U21 manager for 3 years for England. And has had the England job for 8 years.
Steady
and by
Eddie.
virtue of, I think, having an extraordinarily talented international team and getting them to just about the bare minimum of what that team should accomplish, right? Like, They should get to the final of a Euros with the talent they had on English soil, with a final that was at Wembley, right? And like, I don't know, it feels like failing up to me. Anyway, it's all very interesting to me, but I think the other thing I see when I watch the international game, and I think I see it clearly with Arsenal as well, is you just have to have the right pieces in midfield, and you can only ever be so good without it. I think there are special managers who can find a way to manage around not having the midfield. But you look at managers like Ten Hag, he couldn't put a midfield together this season. And United were a dumpster fire because of their midfield. And you look at Arsenal, and we have Odegaard, and we have Rice, and we almost won a title with, our most wins ever in Premier League history, probably one short in midfield, in terms of really having that third and final piece, a little bit of Jorginho, very little bit of Thomas Partey, right? I mean, like Kai in there a little bit. None of the pieces exactly what we'd pick. And, you look at, what does a Rodri do for both Spain and for Manchester City and the teams that really are good? I look at Chelsea, for example. they looked pretty bad for half the season with Enzo in there because it didn't work, right? Caicedo and Enzo, it didn't really work. When Enzo came out of the team injured, suddenly Chelsea started to look pretty good. The midfield made sense. So do you think there's something to this about what we're seeing with England, for example, trying to play Trent in midfield and Jude Bellingham, who wants to go join the attack, and Trent, who doesn't know where to stand and isn't a metronome, and Declan Rice trying to do all the other jobs that are left to him, that midfield is so critical, and that for us, our next step up, as much as we'd like the striker and we'd like the winger, maybe it is that third midfield piece to really create one of the elite midfields in world football, that you can get a lot more out of doing that than maybe anything else on the pitch.
Yeah, you mean for England?
Well, I mean, England aren't going to go buy a midfielder in the middle of the tournament. No. But
well, it's certainly true there. That and the complication that you got Harry Kane dropping into midfield and Trent Alexander-Arnold in midfield.
And Foden wanting to be in midfield to ghost him.
Foden want to be in midfield. And the fact that Saka comes inside and that's the one thing that works. It's just kind of a cluster. But yeah, he's definitely he's missing that midfielder, which is why he's decided to go with the Trent Alexander-Arnold piece there. I've always thought the most important part of any team is going to be its midfield. I mean, that's your alchemy there. It's what sits in front of your defense. It's what stops the defense having to save you all game long. It's what feeds the attack. It's your spine. It's your everything. And those three guys in midfield, and I think you make an interesting point. We got by with some Jorginho and some Partey, sort of, and did bloody well out of it. To me, it's clearly the piece that needs to be addressed. And the huge choice for us is kind of, what do you do with Rice? I think you've got to plumb for, either you get remember when Caicedo was good and we liked him, either you get a Caicedo and a Rice so they can both do a bit of both and it kind of doesn't matter which one. If you have that kind of a player, but if it's more defined in terms of role, then we've absolutely got to work out what we're doing with the left eight with Rice and kind of nail our flags to the mast there. And the whole left side, we've talked about that at length, right? Are we leaning into Timber? And if we are, then maybe Martinelli with the right left eight, we'll see him come to life again. But it's all about that midfield. It's all about that left eight spot and making that decision on Rice. And maybe it's a question of who's available. Yeah. And from there, you can work out. I think Timber could probably do pretty much any role we ask him to do within reason with that setup. But
what's so funny is you see Mikel doing some of the stuff that everybody's saying you have to do for England, right? Which is Saka plays the Saka role for England and Arsenal, and Rice plays the Rice role for both of those. Jesus/Kai kind of do, or were asked to do a little of the way Kane likes to do strikering a bit. But on the left, what is it? It's a run in behind guy. It's a guy we want, that's what we want Martinelli to do. And when we played Trossard over there, I don't think any of us felt the left-hand side worked the way we'd like. It's just that he never stopped scoring goals, which was handy.
Yeah, he got goals by other methods, but it wasn't, the left side wasn't beautiful. And while you're right that Kai drops in, I think Jesus drops in to the degree that Kane does. But Kai makes so many runs in behind. That was always a little bit my frustration with Jesus, and why I wanted Kai first as a left eight and then as a false nine is he false nines, but he's always making, every single time Jorginho looks to see if somebody's making that run, he knows Havertz is making the run, has already made the run. Havertz is totally committed to the run in behind when it's on, and it's great for us and it's great for Germany. So while I see some similarities with him and Kane as a false nine, I think they're almost different ends of the spectrum. Kane never makes that run. Havertz is always looking for the run if it's on.
Yeah, and I'm sorry, you cannot convince me that there isn't a way to piece together the England players into a team that should challenge to win this tournament. Now, here's the irony. They could challenge to win this tournament anyway on the sheer force of their talent, but it should look better than this. It should look better than this. That's the thing that I just can't get past. And with Arsenal, I think it becomes about what do you want players to do? I look at Odegaard, and we got really good this season when Odegaard started dropping in a little more and coming to pick the ball up a little deeper, and we had to do some modification of Odegaard's role. I would like Odegaard to be our Jude Bellingham in some ways. I think Odegaard can have literally 15 to 20 goals and 15 assists in a season. I think he's that kind of player in terms of what he can do in the final third. But I don't think he can do that and be playing 85 passes in central midfield. So it's, what do you want him to do? Well, if you play Kai at 8, you have to have Odegaard connect a little more. You have to. Because Rice cannot just play 120 passes at 95% and cover all the ground. So someone's got to do it. But if you bring in a Jorginho now, right, Odegaard can go do more of that, but he's getting up there in years. So is it a Bruno Guimaraes? Is it a midfielder who enables that? And that's, I got to be honest, that's why I'm a little nervous about like Amadou Onana links, because then what you're really saying is we're going to play Rice and Odegaard at the 8s. We're going to let Onana probably try to, not that he can't pass at all, but he, I do think that is a limitation in his game, and we're going to try to let him protect those two. I think it'd be really hard to counter on us. I think it'd be really hard to get past us. I think it'll be hard to play through us in midfield. But as we've seen with England, someone's got to get their foot on the ball, and games of football are ebb and flow. And I think what made us so dominant this season was you couldn't get into the game. And you want to be able to say, it's our ball, we're keeping it, and you're not going to be able to get it. And I think that the way that wears down opponents is really unique. So I'd love another controlling player in midfield and let Odegaard be even more focused on getting that end product and doing the things that he's really special at in the attacking third. I don't know about you. Do you have a feeling on, could we do what we want to do and be as good at what we want to do if we go get more of an off the ball player like an Onana, someone who's not really the high volume controller, with his passing, or is that going to limit, how we can play, how we can control games?
Yeah, I think we're going to struggle if it were Onana and Rice. If Onana is the left 8 and Rice, or vice versa, you're leaving too much on Odegaard for the craft, and he needs to stay close to his pod, I guess we call it, his triangle with White, with Saka, to work the magic over there, to find Havertz when he makes that diagonal to the right in behind. Like, he has an area of the pitch mapped out to him, and yeah, he can do other things, but he's always like, he's the orchestrator, he's creative. Like, we probably have a bit of I'd love him to score 20 goals, but it might also be a bit of a problem, because if he's doing that, it's probably because he's not getting other people into those positions. Mm-hmm. I mean, why not both? Generally, you don't see both. Mm. So, like, well,
that's what De Bruyne does, right?
Yeah.
I mean, De Bruyne doesn't have to be the metronome in midfield. He can, and he can come pick it up. But what does he really want to do? He wants to run between the lines, find little pockets of space, and score beautiful goals from 18 yards out, or play beautiful slip balls into players running in behind to create goals. Like, I mean, and he does get you 15 and 10 or 18 and 12, or I don't know the numbers in front of me, but that's who he is,
Yeah, and get goals and moments to break and open games. Yeah. But like, the player, like if I were to craft up the player I'd love to see us get, it's a 24, 25-year-old Gundogan on the left-hand side of the pitch.
Yeah.
The ideal player is a bit more athletic, so he gives you a little bit more clout there too. But if you had Timber behind him as the left back, then you got enough muscle on the left-hand side, enough coverage, where then you're getting the craft and the creativity and a bit of the Aaron Ramseys in the box, the cleverness, and you're using Rice's ability to screen and cover, and Gundogan's intelligence about where to be in the pitch to kind of scoop up the turnovers when you've pushed them back, the continuity, the control over the ball. It takes away the need to have too much control in midfield, because you're beating them with the game. And I think you keep Martin Odegaard really doing what he's doing already. The big it's going to be very interesting with Rice, because the big challenge is he's not Jorginho. I mean, he will play good passes, but he's not Jorginho. He's not Rice, and you can't leave it all on Odegaard. So we need something more from that other midfielder, whether we have him deeper or whether you like a Jorginho, like 25, 26-year-old and a bit more athletic, or Gundogan as a left 8 25-year-old Gundogan and a little bit more athletic, please. You could do it either way and have Rice play in whichever position is vacated. But you need some other player with clever running who can finish if he's on the left 8, or with the passing, the Jorginho no-look passes, the connecting with Havertz, the things Partey can do to some degree. It's going to be a really big decision on midfield. I think it's the critical piece of all more so than the striker, because I think Kai Havertz will get it done for us pretty much in the league if he's fed enough. Other players, I think we score enough goals. We need a bit more creativity. It's the third midfield that, if I had to choose between the striker we're supposed to be looking for or the midfielder that solves that problem, I'll take the midfielder first.
Yeah. Well, I got to be honest with you. I don't know who it's going to be, and I don't know what it's going to be. It might be a combination, but I want to switch gears because this is where this all becomes very relevant. The fixtures are out, and we knew it was going to be a hectic season. Seeing them really drives it home. I think Scott pointed out on Twitter that there's a 4-month period where we play every 3 days aside from international breaks, but those international breaks, I believe, will be World Cup qualifiers. So most of our players will continue to play twice a week during that period as well. Champions League goes into January, which means I think we played twice in January this past season. I think we'll have 6 games potentially in January this coming season. And then if we are not directly into the round of 16, we'll have 2 extra Champions League games in February. I have 6 games in that month. There's only 28 days in February, so I don't know where they're going to put them all. Our run-in looks pretty straightforward, and I think if we're in the mix going into April, that will be the target. I said on the pod with Clive, and I hope you listened to it, but I basically said, try to have 65 points with 9 games to play. And if you have 65 points with 9 games to play, I think you can get to 90. But it's going to be tricky. And I think it makes me realize that positions I might not have thought of as being a priority maybe are a priority, like a center back or a fullback, because Saliba and Gabriel are not going to be able to play every single Champions League and league game that we have in the first half of the season. They're not. And then you can say, well, Tomiyasu, well, can you count on that? Well, Kivior, is that the level that we can maintain a title run? And you say Tomiyasu, but Tomiyasu is also the backup left back, presumably. If it's going to be Timber, then Tomiyasu. If Zinchenko goes, or if Zinchenko stays, is it Timber and Zinchenko? Timber certainly isn't going to be able to play 65 games the season after he comes off an ACL. At least I wouldn't think so. So that becomes an area suddenly you say you want to strengthen. Do you look at the fixtures and maybe think, okay, here are the amount of minutes I want certain players to play, and here are the amount of minutes that we have in the season, and suddenly that really informs where you feel you need to shop, and maybe you're shopping in positions you wouldn't have regarded as a priority otherwise.
Yeah, look, I don't think the clubs and the managers have made the adjustments to what's happening here. They know what's going on. Their hand is being forced into this. There's a war being fought between FIFA, UEFA, the Premier League, the this, the that, the cups, the looming super leagues, the international competitions, and they're all fighting for the same precious resource. It's not oil. It's not the war over water. It's the war over the players who are in our clubs. And it could be solved if all of these other competitions started throwing more money at the club. Some of the money is never going to come to the club because it's internationals, it's FIFA. But the solution would be just give us a shitload more money and we'll buy more players, right? We'll have bigger squads. We'll plan for it. We'll be structured for this, as opposed to this basically the same structure, the same. Our contracts are in place, so we can't take the money and just buy more players and pay them all a little less. If they'd give us a time machine, we could go back 3 or 4 years, agree it among all the clubs in a cartel, and drive down the cost of the players so you could have a squad of 24 players you can use. But we don't. We're going to have a squad of 13 or 14 players. And there's no, you can't do maintenance mid-flight. So we're basically stuck with this model where Saliba and Gabriel have to stay fit for the season, which is ridiculous to ask them to do. They'll have to play basically every other game, because where are we going to find the money to get the player who's the third and the fourth centre back, who's basically that level, who's basically also always available. Because it can't be just when he's fit. It can't be Tomiyasu of last year, who may or may not be there when you need him, and probably isn't Murphy's Law, right? It can't be a Murphy's Law. Oh, guess what? We had an injury to Gabriel, and Tomiyasu wasn't available, which is basically how it would have worked last year. So we need to rebuild squads. So, that's basically it. We're going to run on fumes, and the clubs that are best set up for it are going to do best, and that's Manchester City and basically nobody else who's playing in all of those major competitions. We might be better positioned than many, but we're not there yet. We still don't use the same number of players that City use in the same quantities over a full season, having the key players in the key matches, moving them out, moving them around between key matches. You kind of basically know our 11 if it's our most important games. That's not necessarily the case with City. So they're better geared up for it. But if we were to be selective about competitions and make sure we do everything we can, I think we can match them in the Premier League, and, well, we clearly can, and go deeper in the Champions League. But you basically have to be pretty ruthless on everything else at that point, which we kind of were one way or another last year. We got out early. We're going to have to do it again. I don't see how do we scale up and scale out in terms of the squad size and the ability to perform in those other competitions. It's nuts. The players are going to pay for it. The clubs are going to pay for it because those players have been taken away from them, but we're the ones paying them the money that keeps them in the game.
Yeah, and FIFA wants to add a Club World Cup, and there's World Cup qualifying. If you look at the comparison, City last season, 2 players played over 4,000 minutes in all comps, Phil Foden and Rodri, 4,114, 4,167. We had 3 players that topped that, Rice, Gabriel, and Saliba. Saliba had 4,500 minutes. Magalhaes, 4,330. Declan Rice, 4,267. Ben White, 4,080. Martin Odegaard, 4,041. So we had 5 players that played over 4,000 minutes. City had 2. And they distributed the minutes more. But I think there's only one thing that I can see, and it's unavoidable, especially if you're going to make it to like a Champions League semifinal, which is if you think Saliba can give you another 4,500 minute season, God bless you. I mean, I hope he can. I hope Gabriel can give us another 4,300 minute season. Presumably you're going to want those minutes to be in Champions League and Premier League. You just run out of minutes to distribute to those guys in the domestic cups. And I want to ask you if what's happening is football's eating itself, and these domestic cups that are a big part of the tradition and the history and the pomp and circumstance and celebration of not just football, but Arsenal. I mean, Arsenal are the all-time FA Cup record holders in terms of FA Cup wins, and it's a special tournament. But we've seen its decline. We've seen the League Cup become a place that kids are played until the semifinal or final. We've seen the FA Cup become a place where heavy rotation is the norm. If you want to get Saliba to 4,500 minutes again, you have no FA Cup minutes to give him. Clubs are at a crossroads because players are saying, you can't chuck the domestic cups. And clubs are being told, you have to protect the players and rotate more, and don't burn them out. And those two things are just fundamentally at odds. So what happens to the domestic cups? Because my fear, and I don't want to concern troll, it's not really my fear because frankly, I do think the Premier League and the Champions League are the priority. And I'm sorry if that upsets people. But my belief is that it is the demands are incompatible between go for all the cups and properly manage your squad. I don't think it's compatible, especially if you're going to have PSR restrictions and you can't spend this much and you have homegrown requirements and you have to have this many players who are homegrown. It's like, okay, my squad can only have so many players in it. Some of them have to be homegrown. I can only spend X amount of money. And now I have to take seriously 4 competitions, maybe a 5th if you count the FIFA Club World Cup, plus the international breaks. It feels like the downstream effects of this are going to impact domestic cups the most. And I wonder how you feel about the ability for those competitions to continue to be relevant, especially the League Cup, which I already think by and large is not relevant.
Yeah. What pulled me into football and what pulled me into Arsenal was the FA Cup.
Same, by the way, the 98 FA Cup final against Newcastle. Yeah.
it was a special day. It didn't matter who was playing. You'd watch the whole day, the processions in the morning, the fans all the time. Like, I watched FA Cup finals with like feckin' Stoke in them and this and Leeds, and I didn't care. It was an exciting day. Of course, I wanted Arsenal to be there, but it wasn't there. It was still a hell of a day. I couldn't give a monkey's who wins the FA Cup if we're not in it. That's basically where I'm at now with the cup competitions. I kind of don't want us ever to win the
League Cup.
Was it? Yeah, the Carabao
That's how much you
Cup.
care about it. I can't remember the name.
The Milk Cup. I almost think we've made a point by not winning it in forever, and it would look like we were trying to win it and didn't in the past if we go and win it now. So I don't think we can turn around and accidentally win that other cup. It's kind of a meaningless cup that costs too much to win. And there's nothing special about the cups now because of all of these other competitions and emphasis. And what we really need to do is hire some number of PR and messaging folks who find a way to get the message out to the supporters. Not that the club won't try and not that they won't go for them, but they keep explaining the context that the club operates in, which is all of the trade-offs. So it's not saying they don't matter. It's saying, look, these are the demands on this team over the next few weeks, again, in these competitions. And the trade-off really is if we want to be there in the Premier League and the Champions League. And supporters, I mean, it's tough on the away supporters because you're dragging yourself to who knows where, in the rain, in winter, to watch your team play. And, you have to start accepting they only kind of sort of win it. I mean, it's just shitty. It's a shitty setup. It's absolutely crap on the fans in the stadiums that there's this ambivalence, your mother's favorite word, this ambivalence to the cup competitions of you want to win the game on the night, but gosh, it wouldn't be the worst thing if you were out of it, given the other challenges and the injuries that are starting to mount up, and you lose one of your two centre backs and lose a midfielder, and you're in my appetite to go another round in the Carabao Cup or the FA Cup is massively diminished, and it wasn't very strong to begin with. Love when we win the FA Cup, but I even think now winning the FA Cup wouldn't feel like it did a few years ago.
Yeah, and I mean, granted, winning the FA Cup when we weren't even in the conversation to win the league was really, really important. And the FA Cup is a critical competition for clubs that really can never have an aspiration to win the league. But it does feel like it's become two worlds, the world of the teams that want to win the Champions League and the league, and the world of the leagues that are concerned with other stuff. And I hate to say it, it feels like a super league already in a way, right? You got teams like...
We're seeing other cups and competitions, basically.
I'm seeing other cups. Yeah, I mean, it is, though. It's teams that have one goal to go achieve a certain couple of things, and clubs that have other goals to achieve other things. And I guess that's always been football to some extent, so I don't want to say that that's new. But I do think that the demands are more at odds now than they've ever been. I wonder 30 years ago, if the fourth round prop for the FA Cup, if an Arsenal put out a fully rotated side to play lower league or lower table opposition,
they get murdered. They get butchered.
Yeah. And now, if you in
the press, in the media, they'd be absolutely taken,
torn to pieces.
The FA Cup was every bit as important as the Premier League.
Paul, I'm old enough to remember 5 years ago when if you started a rotated lineup in the FA Cup, you'd have headlines like disrespect to the cup, or Ferguson disrespects the cup, Wenger disrespects the cup. Now, you know that you're going to get these at best blended lineups, but it is serving two masters, because if you don't win the domestic cups, it's we shouldn't have chucked the domestic cups. And if you do go for them, and God forbid someone gets hurt, I mean, hell, we were in the Europa League. Saliba played a second leg knockout tie against Sporting Lisbon that we needed to win. He got a back injury. It cost us our title challenge. We completely fell apart. And there was no sympathy. There was no, well, we had to go for that. It was like, why were we playing Saliba in that game? And that was European Cup, let alone domestic cup. So I think that the sacrificial lamb of more and more football and more FIFA football and more UEFA football is the domestic cup calendar. And I think it will be interesting to me to see how these things develop. I don't know if you have a chance to check it out, but Jim Ratcliffe gave an interview recently about Manchester United, and there's too many accountants at the club, and United is a brand like Coca-Cola. United is why people know the city of Manchester. I don't know why that is, but it just is. And like the conversation was absolutely ludicrous and made no sense. But what he was basically calling for is no independent regulator, no regulation at all, to be allowed to do whatever you want to do, because essentially that's the only way for clubs to compete. And it does feel like it's eating itself. I don't want to go down too much down the street of concern trolling, but I'll just ask it to you this way. Going into this season, because this is really, people are bad at doing opportunity cost evaluation. What I mean by that is, it's not, well, we should do this, we should do that. If you do this, what cost does that have? So I'll ask it to you like this. Would you be okay chucking both domestic cups if I told you that gave us a 15% better chance of winning either the league or the Champions League?
I kind of don't even need to do the calculation, because I know what the club has to be all about. So yeah, I'll take the 15%.
And this is my point, right? Because there are people who would say like, well, you can go for all of it. You can, but presumably there's some cost. Now, you might say maybe that cost is 1%. Maybe that cost is 99%. Somewhere between 0% cost and 100% cost is the right number. And I think what I'm saying is, I am now at a point with Arsenal where if we quote unquote chuck the cups, and by the way, we can debate and discuss what chuck the cups means, and it gives us even a 5% better chance of winning the league, because Saka doesn't have to sit out the last game of the season because he's not burned out, or Odegaard doesn't look like he's fading down the stretch, or whatever the case is, then I'm taking that option. And I mean, you can see how hard it is to be a manager, because people accuse us of chucking the cups this season, and we clearly didn't do that. We played Liverpool in the FA Cup at home, played well, got a bit unlucky, and got knocked out by Liverpool when they were in their absolute pomp, and people are still sitting here saying we chucked the cups. So I just don't know how you serve all masters at once, you know?
You can't. And I don't, like, you can say why not go for it all, that you can go for it all, but you can't. I mean, it's just not, that's not taking on the problem. That's not addressing the impossible challenge that the manager in the club has. That's hand waving it to, you don't want to grapple with the problem. You can't have your foot. If you think you can go out, you can't complain that the team wasn't all there. Why did we only give 90% and the others wanted it more? Why did they want it more? If you've burned out your fecking squad playing every game at full intensity all season long, like, if you're a manager over 1,000 seasons, after a little while, you start realizing the seasons where you tried to win every game full strength all the time in every competition, you did really, really badly, and that you're going to stop doing that after 100 seasons or so. That guy who says, why not do it all, go for it all, will eventually come to the same conclusion. There's a trade-off. There's a limit. If I spend here, it's going to cost me here. And you got to go for the Premier League and the Champions League. And if you have anything left in the tank, great.
I got to do something here. I just got to pat us on the back, because I don't do it enough. I think we brilliantly manufactured something to talk about today. I think we're really scraping the bottom of the barrel, but I for one am impressed with how we managed to do it. So kudos to you, my friend.
Yeah. And we got a little angry with each other.
Did we?
A little bit.
I don't remember that part. No.
Okay. We cared enough that we got a little angry.
I'll love with you. My emotional level is never above like a 2, but that's fine. Let me say this. We're about to step aside, and then I'm going to come back and talk to Mike from the Gooners Pod about Super Kev. So I hope you'll stay and listen to that. The latest Euro Daily episode is up, both on this feed and on the Football Vision feed. But remember, we're only posting some of those select episodes of that on this feed. So if you want to listen to it on the Football Vision feed, please sign up for that. Not much else really to cover. Clive's on holiday, so we wish him a wonderful holiday. He certainly deserves it. Tim is not on holiday, and he certainly doesn't deserve it, nor do Paul or I. By the way, tickets for the LA event will be available on Monday. So on the Monday's episode, we'll have information and updates about that. And I think it's going to be one of the coolest live events we've ever done in terms of where we're doing it and how it's going to go and what we got planned for that. So I'm really excited to tell you more details about that on Monday. That'll do it for Paul. He's on Twitter at Pause My Pants. Thanks, Pause. And I I'm coming back with Mike to talk Super Kev. Stay with us. Okay, normally when I invite somebody else on the pod, I say it is now my great pleasure to introduce them. It's not really my great pleasure to introduce Mike in this moment because of the reason he's coming on, but it is my great pleasure to talk to him, and it is my great pleasure to have this conversation. Let me put it that way. So before we get into the conversation itself, Mike Feinberg of the Gooners Pod, and of course, you can support his work with Gooners versus Cancer. Hello, Mike.
Hello, Elliot. Great to see you again. Again,
you too.
Wish it was under different circumstances. Our visits are always happy and fun, and this one not so much.
Well, my hope is that this one will be too. All right. So the reason Mike is on, as I mentioned, we want to celebrate the life of Super Kev, Kevin Campbell. And look, there are a lot of people who are qualified, arguably more qualified, to tell you the history of Kevin Campbell, the player. And I think there have been wonderful things written about him since his recent passing, and written about him obviously prior to that you can read and you can follow on the history. And I know that Tim has some stuff that he wants to share about that on his history as an Arsenal player. But a person contains multitudes, and Super Kev contained multitudes in that he was this icon of the club that we all love and support. He was also a part of the community of supporters in a very unique way. And my hope is to also have Sophie Nicolau on at some point to share her views on co-hosting Highbury Squad with him as well. But for now, Mike, what I'd love to do is really just give you a license to explain a little bit about the Kevin Campbell you knew, how you knew him, how you experienced life and time with him. And I know I was going to say penned, I guess it's not penned anymore, but wrote an article essentially that you posted on Twitter, but I know a lot of people don't go on Twitter. So, for anyone who wants to go there, they can see that article that you wrote about Kev on that site. But I'd love to just get your thoughts on the man. If you want to talk about the player, the man he was as a part of the community of Arsenal supporters and your experience with him.
Well, thank you. And Kevin Campbell is and was, I'm still not used to saying that, a unique individual, and unique is probably used too often. Unique means one of a kind, and he was legitimately one of a kind. He wasn't just unusually special. He was one of a kind, and in a way that you've never seen before by another professional athlete. And my personal story with Kevin Campbell goes back to 1988, 89, the year I moved to London for 2 years, which is, where I discovered Arsenal, discovered Highbury, discovered these passions that continue on my life in these, into these days. And I first laid eyes on Kevin Campbell in the game program during a season where he didn't feature for Arsenal at all, but he was playing in the youth team and absolutely ripping it up. Every week's program, I would look at the beginning of it for the youth and reserves area and see that he was just, it was not whether he had scored, it was how many he had scored. And it became very exciting to, in those days, 2-person benches. You didn't get to see a lot of substitutes. It was very difficult to break into the first team. And when he finally did in March of 1990 or 1989, it was March of 1990 during that next season. I remember watching him score his first goal, going to high five the steward. I mean, it's a moment that stood out in my memory because I saw this guy who at the time, he was always just 3 years older than me. But when I was 16 and he was 19, you almost felt like he was a peer.
Yeah.
And it stuck with me for a long time. Fast forward 32 years or 20, however many years it was, decades. And all of a sudden I'm meeting him through a mutual friend at the 12 Pins and discovering that he is just really, really excited about communicating and connecting with the fan base. And from a platform and from a perspective that was the exact opposite of elitist, distant, on a pedestal, celebrities and athletes, in many cases are seen to be, or because sometimes in reality they are, just kind of off to themselves. It's maybe protective and self-guarding for a way, because if they weren't, they'd be pestered to death. They'd be asked for everything. I mean, as I can tell you clearly, from my travails in the, in celebritydom, Elliot, this is where you laugh. It can be a lot. And I get why people in that position would do that, but Kevin just never, ever once didn't have time for somebody. It was almost like he preferred to be in the company of Arsenal supporters, nameless, people who just enjoyed the club, and he enjoyed their company and contributed to their company and gave his platform to elevate people like me, people like Sophie, who didn't need elevation. She needed a friend and a colleague, and they were. And I don't want to speak to Sophie's relationship with him, because she can certainly do that better than anybody. But he was special in so many different ways.
Yeah, I think it's sort of interesting when a player breaks through and how they break through, and the way they are able to craft their post-playing career life. You look at Ian Wright, and he is sort of the iconic Arsenal star of this era now, as a former player. And there are other Arsenal icons, but I think Ian is sort of the face of the club, of retired footballers in the media. And then you have other footballers who came around, I think, after the Premier League had gone kind of supernova, the Thierry Henrys, right? That caliber of player, where they exist, I think, on a plane even sort of above that, feeling a little bit above the fan base, feeling a little bit in the media more than in the fan culture. And I think Ian straddles that relationship a little more confidently and comfortably. Kevin Campbell did it his own way. He just took to the fan culture. He just took to being among the fans in a way that I think, had he come 10 years later, would not have been possible for him, because of the way fandom and celebrity and growth of football and the explosiveness of the growth of the Premier League and social media changed things. But I think that gave him an opportunity to feel the way that you described him. And in the times I got to interact with him, which were too few, and certainly not as close as I might have liked, it didn't feel like you were talking to ex-Arsenal player Kevin Campbell. It felt like you were talking to Arsenal fan Kevin Campbell, who just had this larger-than-life personality. And I think that is so interesting. The ability for someone who pulled on the shirt and played for the club and had a pretty storied career, not just for Arsenal, but places like Everton, for example, to be able to seamlessly integrate into fan culture. And I wonder what that says to you about who he was. And like that ability to go to the Tollington, right? And just be out dressed to the nines at the Tollington, but not be mobbed.
Always the best dressed.
Not be mobbed in that unpleasant way, but just people were grateful for him to be there. And he really felt like he belonged in a way that I don't know I've ever seen another player interact with fans and belong in that way. It was a very interesting transition into that place and that world. And he felt very at home in it seemed.
It wasn't, oh my God, there's Kevin Campbell, let's go get a selfie. It was, oh, Kev, it's great to see you again.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It was hugs. It was, I want you to meet my daughter when he came to the Tollington. We went up to Manchester, and he would take us to his special pub where he had a corner of the pub, O'Shea's, that was considered his office. I just learned that. I learned that it was called the office from Sophie earlier today. But he took Jake and I in there, wouldn't let us buy him a drink. He bought us a drink. He had his Heineken Zero because he was a healthy guy, which is thus the incredible, sad irony of the whole thing. But it was never about him. It was always about who he was with, and when he would show up at the Tollington, sure, he drew attention, but he was just one of the lads, one of the fans, someone who was more interested in what other people had to say than in sharing what he had to say with other people, and that's even considering the fact that what he had to say to other people was always on point, always wonderful, always positive, always instructive,
enthusiastic, and helpful. I think there obviously have been some Arsenal players that have passed too soon in recent memory. Jose Antonio Reyes, tragically, obviously. I mean, all of this is tragic. Reyes, Rocky Rocastle, obviously going back a little further. With Kevin Campbell, I think the unfortunate part is, as lovely as it is that he's known for being a part of the Arsenal fan community, he may not be as well remembered as he probably should be as a player. For someone who watched him, and for people who love Arsenal now and can tell you everything about how every player on Arsenal now plays, and going back a few years even, do you have maybe a comparison to someone we watched today, or something about Kevin the player, Super Kev, that you would want people who didn't get a chance to really see him and experience him to know, so they can kind of connect to who he was as a player for Arsenal and what he meant to the fan base at the time?
I'm not so sure I would want to pick a name, and certainly our goal scoring forwards. I mean, we've only had a few of them in the last 10 years that are of note. Aubameyang, he was a player. He could score with either foot. He could terrorize defenses. He was fast and large. He had pace and size and strength. I wouldn't want to compare him to somebody. I would, kind of say that he had the aerial skills and physicality of an Olivier Giroud, but he also had the speed and the sneakiness, and was able to play off of Alan Smith and later on Ian Wright in a way that perfectly complemented them. I've heard from both of them, whether they've been saying this in public or to me, that playing with Kevin Campbell was not a challenge. It enhanced their ability to play together. And these are traditional number 9s like Ian Wright and like Alan Smith. You'd think that playing up top with a second number 9 could be difficult, but it just wasn't with Kevin Campbell. He was incredible. I mean, he scored 59 goals for Arsenal. Obviously, his career was different than a lot of Arsenal legends in the sense that he was even more beloved, if that's possible, at Everton. He was equally beloved at West Brom, at Leyton Orient, where he was on loan for half a season, and they tried to sign him, but he basically promoted them. He had a knack of just coming in and saving the day everywhere he went. And one of the things that I'm experiencing, in this moment when Sophie and I are kind of going through tribute videos and assembling a show that's going to air on Thursday night, it's just incredible from how many different corners of the football world this affection and love for him is, and how unanimous it is that and what I didn't know about Kevin, I knew him as a player briefly, and really kind of before he truly became a regular first team player for Arsenal. By that point I had left and moved back to the States, unfortunately. And then, of course, I knew him for the last 6 years as a friend to Gooners, as a podcaster, as a mentor. What I didn't know is how respected he was in the dressing room, how respected he was by his other teammates. And you mentioned someone earlier who I use in almost godlike terms as being the embodiment of what Arsenal Football Club is all about, and that's David Rocastle. I saw him play. I knew I've known his family for a number of years. I know the way that his teammates all speak in glowing terms of how he was and welcome them into the team. And I never thought that I would see another person who kind of ticked so many of those boxes. But it was right in front of my face all along, because, he may not have been lauded at the time as being the unbelievable player that Rocastle was in his prime relative to other people in his position, because, a lot of guys could score a lot of goals for their teams. But, the more I've heard from the people who knew him best and spent day in and day out with him every single day in the late 80s and the 90s, who knew him from 13 years old in the youth team all the way through his career, it's Rocastle-esque, and his wonderful family and the quality people that his sons are. It's very, very eerily similar. And the difference between Rocky and another South London guy and Kevin is that I got to know Kevin and be his friend. And I will always be thankful for that, and always be regretful that it didn't last longer.
Yeah, it's just sort of hard to process, I think, gone at 54 years old, far too young. And I think in an era when fandom has reached a level that I don't think has ever been hit before in the way people can connect to a club and connect to players, and with social media and Instagram and Twitter and live streams, and players have their own live streams and things of that nature. We want to believe that players aren't just players, that they're fans like us, that they love the club like us. But I think we know deep down, realistically, with the money that's involved and the pressure that's involved, we know Ben White, right? A player like Ben White, we adore Ben White, but like when Ben White's not doing football, he's not doing football. You know what I mean? The players have to create that separation. And I think it is quite rare that they experience fandom in the way we do. And I don't mean that to be critical of players. I think
spent a week at the 12 Pins waiting for Ben White to show up one time, and I just couldn't believe that he didn't show.
No. He was in Dubai. But like, and he's living his best life right now. Make no mistake about it. But I just think to have a player like this who was an Arsenal player and then in his post-playing career does fandom in a way that I think we'd like to believe about all the players, right? Just a true fan, so much a fan that like sit down in front of your laptop and do a live stream with Sophie Nicolau and the Highbury squad, right? And the squaddies, and sign off every night, and to want to share your thoughts on Arsenal in that way. I think it's interesting too, because I obviously came to football later in my life. I'm an American, which is no surprise to anybody, but like, I know shocking revelations on this podcast. And I do think it is possible for people to want to gatekeep football and gatekeep football opinions. And I've been very fortunate not to have faced as much of that as I might. But to go on the Highbury squad, the first time I went on, I remember I was quite intimidated because, well, now I'm going on to talk football with someone who pulled on the shirt and played it. And that's different. I talked to Clive on the pod. He knows his football inside and out. Tim, Paul, but this was different. This was the first time I was doing something like that, not in an interviewer capacity, but in a capacity to give my opinion. What if my opinion's bad? What if my opinion's wrong? And just right from the beginning, complimentary of our pod, complimentary of what we do, complimentary of the viewpoints. At the end of the pod saying, we got to get these guys back on, really enjoyed listening. And he didn't have to be that gracious. He could have been a different way. He could have had a way of stating his opinion or reacting to mine that just kind of put me in my place as someone who hasn't played the game and came to the game later in life. There was nothing like that about him. One of the things that happens a lot in football now is that having a football opinion is a contest. It's a competition. Your opinion's wrong and mine's right. And there was nothing like that about the way he presented his. It was welcoming. It was inclusive. It was inviting. And it was allowing everybody to be a fan in the way they wanted to be a fan as long as they loved Arsenal. And I just really think if we want to believe our players are fans, that's fine. Deep down, we might know differently. Kevin's from that rare breed that really was in the way we really are. And I loved that about him. And again, I want to be careful not to overstate my knowledge of him and my relationship to him, other than that I considered him an important part of a community that is very special in my life. So, Mike, I think we can leave it there. I know you have a show coming up that'll celebrate Kevin, and I don't think that'll be the last time that's done. But for anybody struggling and anybody struggling with the news and struggling through their own hardship, I hope you are, wherever you are okay, that you get through it, that you are loved, that you're part of our community and part of, the parts of your life that are important to you. I hope they lift you up, because I know things like this can be difficult to talk about, and maybe a reminder of things you're going through in your own life as well. So love to everybody listening. Our love and thoughts and condolences to Kevin Campbell's friends and family and the community of people that he touched. And Mike, I can't thank you enough for taking some time to come on to talk about Super Kev and to just expand and enlarge people's understanding of who he was as a person, because it is a big loss to our club and our community. Well,
it's a cathartic thing to do to focus on the positives of a person in the wake of losing them. But it's a door we all have to walk through. It's, people have reached out to me to ask how I'm doing, which just blows my mind. I mean, I would never profess to have been Kevin's closest friend or a confidant or anything. But, those who were, Lee, Sophie, are the ones who need the support right now. I'm pouring all my energy into making sure that they're okay and helping them out. And I know for a fact from speaking to them that, the outpouring of support and memories and positive words that's happened all over media and social media has gotten to the family, has touched the family, and is very much appreciated by them. That's so great. Thanks for having me on, Elliot. Next time we'll talk about, football stuff. But this is important, and I really appreciate you letting me speak to it.
Yeah. And candidly, I knew that I wanted to do something to celebrate Kev. I wasn't sure what that was. I certainly didn't want to pretend, like I said, to have greater knowledge than I did. I know that you've written beautifully about him, that you obviously were touched by him, and your life intersected with his. And so I appreciate you being someone to come on and lend voice to that. And I know there are many, many others who could share their story, but it was important to me that we got a story out here for people to connect to him, and for people who knew him, no story was certainly necessary. I'll level with you. I find death and loss very difficult to talk about. And I know there are others a lot like me. I'm very uncomfortable with it. I don't know the right things to say. I don't know how to comfort people properly. I don't know how to process it properly myself. So sometimes just celebrating what's good about a person I think is the best way to do it. And hopefully we've done a little of that for people. And, hopefully not many more occasions in the near future to have to do these kinds of conversations. But as you said, everyone walks through that door, and we should find a way to react to it as positively as we can. So hopefully just a little bit of that here, he says, waffling, because as I said, I just don't know how to best discuss this sort of thing. So as I said, I hope everyone's okay. Yeah.
Appreciate you doing that, and your unbelievable viewer and listener base. Many of them will know who Kevin was. Many of them won't, and I appreciate you getting the word out about it and allowing me to help with that. Yeah,
of course, and it's great to see you, and I look forward to seeing you for all kinds of good, fun, exciting reasons in the near future. You can check out Mike wherever you see Gooners versus Cancer stuff, and Mike, not just great to talk to on a variety of topics, but a phenomenal fundraiser for a great cause. So we'll leave it there. Thanks everybody for joining us. As I mentioned, Tim will have a history pod over on the Patreon tomorrow. Phil is going to maybe drop another pod every 5 minutes for the next 4 days about the Euros and Copa America. You can check that out. And we'll look to have more very Arsenal-specific stuff just as soon as Arsenal does something. Arsenal's become that meme where the stick is pushing at the person saying, do something. Come on, Arsenal. do something. We got podcast to fill. We love you. And we will talk to you after Arsenal 10. Transfer 1-0.